Welcome back to Otaku Daikun. Dai here. It's time for us to finish covering Arcueid's route in the Tsukihime Remake. This is my guide so that you all can understand the basic lore and story of the remake, even though it's not in English yet. This will help you when playing the Japanese version for yourself, while also giving international fans an idea of what we're missing. Last we left off, Shiki discovered that the vampire attacks were still happening. Vlav wasn't the only vampire in the city, so he teamed up with Arcueid once more to fight the vamp known as Michael Roa Valdemyong. Before they could make any tremendous headway, Arcueid appeared to succumb to her own bloodlust, and after a violent altercation, she and Shiki split up. Shiki wakes up the next morning, still thinking about what happened in the alleyway. Unable to believe it's over between them, he zombies through his morning with minimal interaction. Even at school, Shiki lacks the motivation to chat with Arihiko, telling him to go chill with their cute senpai. Surprisingly though, Arihiko has no idea what Shiki's talking about. He doesn't remember anything about Ciel, and even Shiki notices he can't remember her name. It's like they quickly forget she ever existed. Her little brainwashing spell has worn off, and she clearly wiped herself from their memories, at least to an extent. This is likely because Shiki was confirmed not to be Roa's next host. Following that logic, it seems Noelle is no longer working as his teacher either, having suddenly quit the job. After all, she and Ciel were only ever in his life due to their suspicion of him. Both the church and Arcueid want Shiki to move past all this vampire stuff, but he can't. After class, with the weekend upon him, Shiki decides to return to the site of Vlav's attack. The park beside the station is in ruins, surrounded by bouquets of flowers left to honor the deceased. He once fought Vlav under the notion that he could save innocent people, but looking at the remains, he realizes that was just an excuse. In truth, he fought so he could stay with Arcueid. In that regard, he questions whether he should still go after Roa on his own. Just as he's about to walk away, he spots Ciel coming with flowers to offer the dead. He can't recall her name, but he hasn't forgotten her entirely. She tells him that searching for Roa will bring him back to Arcueid, but that he should instead stay out of it. Despite what Arcueid said about drinking blood, true ancestors do indeed possess bloodlust. The dead apostles got their bloodlust from when they were first bitten by the true ancestors, after all. They may not need blood to survive, but true ancestors have carried this bloodlust from the beginning, and while they try to suppress it, it's only a matter of time before they succumb to their urges. Now that Arcueid has used so much energy recovering from Shiki's initial attack and subsequent battles, her ability to suppress her bloodlust is compromised. It becomes even harder after a true ancestor has actually tasted blood. That's how the dead apostles first came to be, created as a source of blood for their makers who could no longer suppress their impulses. Ciel states that what happened last night was Arcueid reaching her limit after over 800 years. She explains that Arcueid was born for the express purpose of hunting and exterminating the other true ancestors who had succumbed to their bloodlust. In other words, it has always been Arcueid's duty to defeat vampires. In that role, she excelled, not burdened by her own bloodlust because she was preoccupied with her hunts. She was like a missile, going straight to her destination and eliminating the target without delay. At all other times, she was sleeping. During this most recent awakening, however, she has finally shown signs that her thirst has caught up with her. Tragically, her solitude within the glorious Millennium Castle Brunstad was the only thing keeping those instincts at bay. Even after being hailed as the princess of the true ancestors, none of her kin ever approached her. She was never taught the basics of life, only killing, and in the end, she killed all the other true ancestors, including those who raised her for that very purpose. In a sense, her bloodlust prevents her from enjoying the sort of everyday life she enjoyed with Shiki. For these reasons, Ciel tells him to stay away from her, as it's impossible for them to coexist happily. Even so, he declares he still has to take responsibility for killing Arcueid. More importantly, he wants to be with her even if she's a murderous vampire. He stubbornly chooses to believe she won't drink his blood if he sees her again. Ciel realizes she won't get through to him and excuses herself to catch a flight out of the city. She's apparently been demoted and is no longer on the Roa case. As she leaves, Shiki asks why she didn't fully erase his memories. She comments that she had just forgotten, and with the snapping of her fingers, she finishes the job. With his memories of her wiped, she leaves the station. Having admitted to his true feelings, Shiki feels relieved and heads back to the mansion so as to not worry his family. Hisui is surprised to see him in such good spirits, actually coming home on time for a change. He wants to do things properly moving forward, and enjoys a pleasant meal with Akiha and the maids. Unsure if he'll ever come back to his room, he tidies up his things and sets out to find Arcueid. He arrives at the park just before 10 p.m., figuring this will be the best place to reunite, considering the two made a promise to meet there previously. He ignores the impulse to go out and search for her, confident that she'll show up to him. Hours pass by as he patiently waits, despite knowing that Arcueid is actually hiding behind a pillar near the rest area. At 3 in the morning, he finally calls her out, and she nervously steps into the moonlight. Even though she had asked him to stay away, he declares he's here to fulfill his promise to defeat Roa together. She laments that she has no right to have his help, considering she truly did crave his blood and was about to bite him earlier. He forgives her, reasoning that she was exhausted, and he was too foolish to consider what she was going through. It was a frightening experience for sure, but regardless of what he's heard from the burial agency, he still wants to be by her side even after understanding her situation. As expected, Arcueid has been doing her best to hold back her bloodlust, but she's been struggling the most ever since she met Shiki. She figures it wouldn't have been a problem had they avoided each other from the start. In his usual suave manner, he jolts up and yells at her, calling her an idiot for thinking like that. Through his tirade, he proclaims that he will be there to help her no matter what. With tears in his eyes, he begs her not to think she'd be better off alone. Sadly, Arcueid doesn't have the same confidence to contain herself. She only stopped back then because, of all people, she didn't want Shiki to see her as a monster. She hopes to end things on a positive note, doubling down on the idea that they shouldn't see each other anymore. She'll slay Roa so that Shiki can go back to his normal life. As she tries to leave, he holds her by the shoulder and admits that he never really partnered with her to protect the city. He did it because he loves her. Refusing to part ways, he hugs her tightly, assuring her that his desire to be with her is so strong he doesn't care how dangerous it is. Just feeling her heartbeat is enough to stroke his passion. Arcueid at first resists, trying to prioritize her worries, but ultimately embraces what she wants most by returning his hug. When they unravel, he expresses his relief that, after what he'd done to her, he can finally love her as he meant to, happy to have a second chance. Overjoyed, he startles her with another hug, making her comment how strange it is for the man who killed her to be holding her so assertively. It makes her happy, or so she thinks, given that her face is relaxed into a smile all its own. She asks him what kind of face she's making, and though he can't see her while hugging, he's certain her face is the same as his, cheeks loosened like a giddy fool. It's obvious they're not going home alone tonight. They head back to Arcueid's condo, and in the dark room, Arcueid puts her hand on Shiki's back, asking him not to turn around. She reminds him about the time she waited for him to come to school after killing her. Back then, she hated him and wanted revenge, but the longer she waited, the more eager she became to meet the guy strong enough to take her down. What kind of person could get her so worked up? While in a roundabout way, it made her aware of her own loneliness, and so she waited patiently for the man she loved before even realizing it. Their feelings collide, and the two gently kiss each other. His lips touch hers through a comforting warmth. Her body trembles, but not because she feels threatened. Rather, her cheeks are pink like cherry blossoms. Their passion overflows, and while Arcueid's heart is racing, she wonders if this is really okay, for a human to kiss a vampire. He relaxes her worries by bringing her to the bed. He continues what he wanted to do in the alley, only now in full control of his body. Or as controlled as a horny teen can be, anyway. Unafraid, she welcomes him, and the two, get down. Shiki wakes up in a euphoric daze after the two fall asleep holding hands. He notices Arcueid get up, and she asks him what he'd do if she actually did resort to sucking blood. Still half asleep, he answers that he couldn't imagine it, and that he hates what-ifs like that. Without disturbing his slumber, she proclaims her love, thanks him for his kindness, and sneaks out before the sun rises. When Shiki wakes up, he wonders if last night was just a dream and tries to confirm it, only to realize Arcueid is gone. All that's left in her room is a note saying bye-bye. Feeling betrayed, he runs out into the city to look for her, certain that she means to leave him for good this time. After an entire day with no luck, he returns to the mansion in defeat. Having spent his entire weekend in vain, he wakes up the next morning and returns to his normal routine. Figuratively dead inside, he simply goes through the motions, greeting Hisui, having breakfast, and talking to Akiha in the sitting room. His school day mostly passes as a mundane blur. During the break, he is approached by his physics teacher, who wishes to speak to him about his activities in the city at night. He's asked to wait in the tea ceremony club room to talk with a guidance counselor after school. He does as told, but by the time 6 p.m. rolls around, it's obvious he's been forgotten about. Well, that sucks. I'd be frickin' pissed. At least it gave him time to gather his thoughts. His morale had dropped, but now he's ready to search for Arcueid again. He walks out of the hallway and notices the moon emerging after the sunset. Suddenly, he is struck by a suffocating presence. The wound on his chest throbs as he spots a humanoid figure approaching him from the other end of the hall. Shiki removes his glasses and readies his knife, noticing the dark figure has small lines but a definite point of death in the center. It begins to speak with a man's voice, rambling about how human life is a book that weathers over time. This metaphor winds up paralleling parts of CL's route, so keep that in mind. The man charges, and Shiki reciprocates, covering 10 meters in the time of a single breath. In the speed of a blink, however, the man slips behind him and seizes his knife. Declaring he can see the lines too, the man takes the knife and plunges it straight into Shiki's chest. The white steel pierces Shiki like paper, causing him to freeze and collapse onto the floor. On his way down, he gets a glimpse at the man's maniacal face, and while he doesn't recognize it on sight, he recalls the aura is the same as during his past accident in the forest. His consciousness fades despite his wound having no pain. The man appears to talk to himself, declaring that in exchange for borrowing power, he will now take over the body. When the man refers to himself as Shiki, memories come flooding back. That bloody day in the garden, there were 2 boys, both named Shiki. One had killed the other. Our Shiki remembers the other boy just as the man's body is completely consumed by Roa. Just as this truth is revealed, the former and true heir to the family, Shiki Tono, vanishes, having completed his mission of killing our Shiki, or so he thinks. Our Shiki isn't quite dead yet, but Roa intends to fix that by pulling out the knife. Before he can, however, he is interrupted when black keys crash through the school windows. Coming to the rescue, CL bursts in, forcing Roa to distance himself. The two of them stare each other down, and rather than being intimidated, Roa starts laughing. He claims that in over 800 years of reincarnation, he's surprised to see his former husk come back to fight him. Ignoring the taunts, CL remains ready to protect Shiki, which Roa finds pointless, claiming a mere human can't escape death. Interrupting the tension, a radio carried on CL starts talking. Mario is on the other end and introduces himself to Roa. He tries to negotiate, claiming he will have the church leave Roa alone for a whole 7 days in exchange for Roa's research on immortality. Mario's grandfather Laurentis wants the findings from that research to preserve his aging body, but those hopes are crushed when Roa explains he found human immortality impossible, hence why he became a vampire to experience immortality of the soul. Disappointed, Mario orders CL to fall back until they have reinforcements. Roa doesn't mind, claiming he has to prepare for Arcueid's arrival. Thus, CL takes Shiki and jumps out of the building from the window. Unable to complain, Shiki watches with the knife still stuck in his chest as CL sprints and rushes across the city. Along the way, she tells him to stay calm and that Akiha should be able to save him, just like 7 years ago. As CL tells him to keep quiet, Shiki loses consciousness just outside the mansion. As he slumbers, Shiki recalls his past and how he was adopted. He used to live in a separate building from the main mansion, a traditional Japanese house with tatami flooring. He knew he wasn't blood-related, but did his best to fit in with the Tonos regardless. When he wakes up, he's in his room, bandaged up with the knife removed. Akiha is by his side, making him wonder why he wasn't taken to a hospital. As thanks for saving him, Akiha has allowed CL to rest in one of their guest rooms. No longer able to hide the truth, Akiha admits that she knows about the other Shiki. For the sake of our sanity, I'm going to be referring to our Shiki as Nanaya, and the other one is Tono, given they're from different families. Even when Nanaya asked, Akiha lied to him about Tono being around them as kids. The lies end here, though. Contrary to what Shiki Nanaya believes, he didn't actually kill the other boy. Rather, it was the other way around. The Tonos are a family of mixed blood. More specifically, their human blood is mixed with demon blood. A dark truth the family tries to both hide and suppress. When one of them succumbs to their demonic urges, it's called having an inversion impulse, and 7 years ago, Shiki Tono inverted while playing with Akiha and Nanaya. As a result, Nanaya wound up pierced through the chest. His scars came from this attack, and it nearly killed him. It was an absolute disaster, especially since inversions were usually something that came with age, and yet it happened to a child. When Makihisa saw this, he knew his own son needed to be stopped, and it was a family obligation to murder those who had inverted. Thus, Makihisa nearly killed Shiki Tono, leaving both boys bleeding to death in the forest. As Akiha tells the story, Shiki Nanaya was able to survive and was taken to the hospital under the lie that he was caught in a traffic accident. To save the family's reputation, Makihisa decided to swap the two Shikis and pretend that Nanaya was his true son, and that the adopted Shiki died that day. Nanaya is willing to believe this story, but his real surprise came from learning that he and Akiha aren't actually siblings by blood. It adds up, though. The reason he was sent to live with the Arimas was because while he could pose as the family's eldest son in name, he couldn't actually succeed the family without being discovered. Deciding not to question too much why he was adopted in the first place, Nanaya instead asks why Shiki Tono is still alive. Didn't Makihisa kill him? It's safe to assume that both Shikis were able to survive their injuries, so Makihisa must have kept Tono's survival hidden. Furthermore, the reason for Tono's childhood inversion is rather obvious. It must have happened when his body was infiltrated by Roa's soul. Aside from Roa's interference, however, none of this was anyone's fault. Before Nanaya gets some rest in bed, he asks Akiha why she still cares about him, even if they aren't real siblings. She sets him straight, affirming that she's always accepted him as her big brother, her only brother given what happened to Tono. She leaves and lets Shiki Nanaya relax. Obviously, this conversation doesn't tell the full truth. Akiha never mentioned that the reason Shiki Nanaya survived was that she gave up half of her life force to save him, and in turn, Shiki Tono stole some of that life force from him. As such, the three of them are connected through Akiha's energy, which is in part to blame for Nanaya's violent outbursts. Anyway, 4 hours have passed since Shiki was stabbed, and now it's 10 p.m. He can't get up even though he wants to, as his body is totally paralyzed. He feels lucky just to flex a finger, so he starts with small movements and tries to work his way up so he can go find Arcueid. As he struggles, he notices his own lines and points of death. The point Roa stabbed earlier, despite being where his chest wound was, did not actually have a death point, making him wonder if Roa was seeing something different than death lines. Otherwise, Shiki would have died for sure. CL comes to check up on him, and is upset to see him trying to get up. For a moment, he stares at her, now wearing glasses along with her church garb. With this appearance, he begins to remember her again. When Shiki thanks her for saving him, she remarks it's actually the second time. Turns out, and some of you guys noticed during part 2 of this series, Shiki was only able to defeat Vlav because CL helped him from the shadows. There was a single black key that broke through the ice pillars fired at him. Earlier, he thought it was Noelle who had done it, but now we know it was our adorable senpai. Hoping it will keep Shiki in bed for a bit longer, CL agrees to reveal some information about the current situation. Mario's consulting with Akiha downstairs, and Noelle is undergoing medical treatment. They're trying to come to terms with the fact that Roa certainly did reincarnate as the Tono heir. They just didn't realize our Shiki was a different person. Akiha hates the church and CL, but in this case they're cooperating instead of killing each other. CL admits this with a smile. Turns out, Roa's been right under our noses the whole time, hiding in the school. Perhaps Shiki should have let Arcueid check it out after all. Roa's out and about now that his minions are eliminated. It seems that while Roa has now taken full control of Shiki Tono's body, he still retains an element of Shiki's personality. This is typical of his reincarnations. Losing aspects of his original personality for the chance to be immortal is just part of how Roa works. The current Roa will always be an amalgamation of his previous personalities, something different than the man who first became a vampire. In that regard, it's clear that Roa is motivated to kill Shiki Nanaya, as Shiki Tono wants revenge for having been replaced in the family. While being secretly imprisoned by Makihisa, Tono spent the last 7 years building resentment for the boy who took his role. Even though it's tragic, Shiki Nanaya wants to slay Roa because of how dangerous a vampire he is. Rather than it being a personal matter, Shiki wants to finish things with Arcueid as promised. CL doesn't understand why Shiki cares so much about helping a vampire like Arcueid, so he clarifies that regardless of whether or not she's a vampire, he loves her. Regardless, she says even the two of them together wouldn't be strong enough to defeat Roa, not in their compromised states anyway. Arcueid is using too much of her own power to suppress her bloodlust, and she doesn't have enough to spare for the fight. Hearing this, Shiki tries to get up and go to her rescue, but he just hits the floor like falling garbage. His stab wound to the chest may not have left a mark, but it still wounded his vitality. Basically, the attack drained his life force. CL helps him back on the bed, propping him up so he can at least sit. Even this is straining. He can't possibly help Arcueid like this. CL says he doesn't need to fight, and that the church will take care of things with reinforcements set to arrive in 3 days. Knowing Arcueid won't wait that long, Shiki forces himself to stand and asks for his knife. CL says she'll hand it over if he can explain what he sees in Arcueid. For the moment, he declares he can't just leave her alone. She's been by herself all her life, and he can't stand to let that persist now that he's seen her laughing happily. He wants to take her places and show her all the things she's been denied all these years. He loves her and is willing to put his life on the line to save her. CL realizes it's pointless to argue with that conviction, content with his answer. Turns out, though, Arcueid was listening in on their conversation from outside the window. She runs off, making a rattling noise that alerts them. CL surmises that Arcueid is going off to fight Roa right away, so that Shiki won't have to sacrifice himself. She's jealous of the mutual devotion Shiki and Arcueid have for each other, both willing to sacrifice themselves for the other. CL tells Shiki there's nothing he can do to catch up with Arcueid at this point. He should just rest like she instructed earlier. Of course, Shiki refuses in an emotional outburst. He demands CL take him to the school, and when she opposes him, he threatens to assault her. That's right, Shiki's iconic line is still intact, or at least it seems to be. He uses the term mechakacha, which most easily translates to messed up. He's saying he'll mess her up if she doesn't comply, which I think justifies Mirror Moon's old translation in the original, where he drops the R word. I mean, how else would a man mess up a woman in this case? Real classy there, Shiki. As expected, CL looks on in disgust, but then lets out a sigh before rejecting his attractive proposal. Ooh. In return for provoking Arcueid, CL agrees to escort Shiki to Roa's lair. Naturally, this means carrying him as she leaps out of the window and sprints across the rooftops. Ahead of them, Arcueid is doing the same thing, basking in joy from hearing Shiki's confession. She leaps from roof to roof, shouting out her love beneath the glowing moonlight. It is the happiest she's ever been in her entire life, and she carries herself as purely as her overflowing affection. All of her worries of the future and her battle with Roa melt away as she cherishes this moment. She won't slay Roa because it's her duty as a true ancestor, but rather for Shiki's sake. She thinks it's the only thing she can offer to return Shiki's feelings. Eventually, CL and Shiki arrive outside the school building. She lets him down, and he removes his glasses to survey the area. While he does so, CL warns that because it's the night of a full moon, Roa and other vampires are at their strongest. At this point, CL decides to part with Shiki, claiming that she won't face Roa head-on, but if they fail to kill him, she'll finish the job. Accepting that this is his own battle, he thanks her for her help and remarks that he enjoyed the time they spent at school together. She expresses it was like a pleasant dream and takes off in her own direction. While Shiki enters the main building, CL actually rushes around the side. As a professional huntress, she avoids being detected by clearing her mind and erasing her thoughts as though she were an automaton. She senses through mana density that Roa is near the gymnasium, and Arcueid is approaching through the hallways. Despite what she told Shiki, she actually hopes to infiltrate the building and mount a surprise attack on Roa. Before that, however, she spots a freaky giant spider ghoul clinging to the wall. It's a new variant of dead she's never seen before. An explosion rings out inside the school, indicating that Arcueid and Roa have started fighting, but Ciel will have to deal with her own enemy first. The creature rapidly crawls across the windows with its long legs that extend like whips. It fights from a distance, launching airborne spines that Ciel avoids by jumping to the rooftop. While regenerating its spines for another shot, it follows her upward. It may rely on ranged attacks, but Ciel can't underestimate the strength of its main arms. She's confident she can win, though, so the real issue is how long it will take her. The most she can spare is 10 minutes to take it down. Inside the school, Shiki looks for Arcueid, following claw marks and the smell of burning up the stairs to the 3rd floor. His body is still in great pain, but he pushes through it out of desperation. The way he sees it, he should be the main attacker and have Arcueid on support, not the other way around. Finally, he spots her and Roa fighting in the hallway. Arcueid appears weak, on the verge of breaking as she kneels down. As Roa charges a blast of energy, Shiki runs to her side, only for her to paralyze him with her mystic eyes. Roa finds it funny how she'd refuse help when she's struggling so much. He'd prefer to kill them both together, of course. Despite her own pain, she stubbornly refuses to get Shiki involved. Her problem is that even when she claws Roa, tearing apart whole chunks of his body, he simply regenerates without even flinching. Recovering from strike after strike, he mocks her for not being able to demonstrate the full might of a true ancestor. He claims to have an advantage because he's genuinely experienced death repeatedly and no longer fears it. Basking in hubris, he continues to express his superiority, provoking Arcueid to bring out one of her strongest abilities as a true ancestor, the Marble Phantasm. Essentially, it is a power granted to her by the planet for being a nature spirit that allows her the authority to sculpt the material world according to her will. In a commanding tone, she forbids Roa from harming Shiki, and the hallway begins to transform. She prepares to seal Roa in a confined space, and while he knows it will be his demise, his sudden terror is almost pleasant for him. He actually anticipates experiencing her wrath, the power of the woman who he admits made him into a dead apostle. He screams in joy as Arcueid traps him, and with a single swipe of her claws, absolutely obliterates him. All that remain are his dismembered feet, but sadly, even from that, he is able to automatically regenerate through a spell he constructed. Slowly but surely, Roa's massacred corpse reassembles itself, undoing the damage Arcueid had exhausted her energy to inflict. When his body finishes healing, she is exposed, unable to fight back as he slices into her with his claws, claiming to have the same ability that Shiki does. In line with this, the wound itself doesn't tear or bleed externally. Instead, he appears to have cut her death line. Arcueid falls to the ground, and Roa brags that he obtained such an ability after experiencing death himself so many times. With the mystic eyes no longer affecting him, Shiki runs to embrace her and notices how cold she's become. Ignoring his enemy, he continues to console Arcueid in her final moments. Hugging her tightly, he asks why she couldn't rely on him for help. Weakly, she pretends to have forgotten their promise, but assures him that he's already helped her in so many ways. The light in her eyes fades as she proclaims how relieved she is to be able to protect him. Reluctantly, he thanks her, but then begs her to drink his blood to regain her strength. She refuses, and instead asks him to kiss her. Gently, Shiki puts his mouth to Arcueid's cold lips, granting her genuine bliss as she passes on. His quiet morning is interrupted by Roa's footsteps, impatient from waiting on their lover's farewell. With his dream of being with Arcueid crushed, Shiki has nothing left but to settle the score with Roa. Roa is impressed by Shiki's eyes, but admits his own must be more powerful as he has so readily embraced death over the years. Even so, he claims it would be a waste to lose Shiki's amazing ability, so he proposes they join forces. More specifically, Roa wants to make Shiki into his own killing machine. Rather than answering, Shiki asks if Roa can only see lines on living things. When Roa claims it makes sense for only living things to have the concept of death, Shiki realizes their eyes are fundamentally different. Roa isn't actually seeing death, but rather life. Overly confident, Roa proclaims he'll have Shiki's first job as his slave be to kill Ciel. While he rambles on, Shiki prepares for combat. After all, seeing death is an entirely separate tier of dangerous. When Shiki expands his vision to see all the lines surrounding him, Roa begins trembling from a threat he cannot perceive. Roa demands Shiki not look at him, terrified by the sudden revelation of his inferiority. The concept of death, a return to the root, exists for all things regardless of whether they're alive. Seeing death is a constant reminder of how fragile the entire world is, and even Roa's reincarnating form can be put to a true death by cutting the right lines. To demonstrate what it actually means to kill things, Shiki readies his knife and plunges it into the school's floor. In a wild surge, the building crumbles to pieces, crushing Roa beneath the rubble. The hallway they were fighting in is now in ruins. From the wreckage, Roa emerges, his upper body severed from the rest. In agony, he crawls out into the open, unable to regenerate his missing half. Through a hateful glare, Roa curses Shiki as a monster, unable to fight back as Shiki's knife easily pierces his death point. Shiki tells Roa not to fret, that this is something he's experienced many times. The only difference is that this time, there's no coming back. As awesome as this is, Roa's a stubborn one, and just when things seem resolved, he pops back for a final jump scare. While his body crumbles away, he makes a desperate attempt to transfer himself into Shiki, using their connection to Akiha's energy as a pathway. Having enough of this bastard, CL silences Roa's crumbling remains with a slash of her black key. The battle has officially ended. To protect Shiki from all the drama involved in cleaning up the mess and dealing with the church, CL decides to take credit for killing Roa. Shiki is just glad it's finally over, entrusting the rest to her as he passes out from exhaustion. The route's final chapter begins with Shiki being woken up by Hisui, 1 month after the fight. As if nothing had happened, things are back to normal, with him having to get out of bed and see Akiha before she gets angry. He hasn't used his knife since killing Roa. The murders have stopped, and even though there was no public arrest, the townspeople should become less afraid of the city in time. Shiki's school has been repairing the destroyed corridor. Not a day goes by that he doesn't think of Arcueid, hoping to solidify their experiences in his memory. In that effort, he makes a habit of visiting his classroom at sunset, fulfilling his promise to return there with Arcueid even though she's no longer around. On one of these occasions, however, he hears a sound and notices the window open. Miraculously, he finds Arcueid standing by his desk, alive and well. She didn't intend to see him again, but she couldn't just leave him coming back here day after day in futility. She thanks him for keeping their promise, but declares she can't see him anymore. She's alive now because Roa had once stolen some of her energy, and when he was truly killed, that energy came back to her, restoring the life she lost in the school building. When Roa was first human, he coerced Arcueid into drinking his blood, which is how he became a dead apostle to begin with. During that exchange, Roa inherited a portion of her power that she's been trying to get back ever since. Arcueid avoids drinking blood because the one time she did, it caused such a horrible tragedy. Sadly, even a true ancestor who only drinks blood once will never be the same. Her bloodlust was awakened that day, and now that it's here, she can never rid herself of it. Just like the church said, she's at her limit, and so she has to seclude herself from the world, including Shiki. It may be a goodbye, but she assures him that when she's sleeping in the Millennium Castle, she'll be dreaming of him, forever happy because of the time they spent together. In turn, she asks him to keep living on and to enjoy his life to the fullest. After letting out a sad laugh, she disappears once more, leaving Shiki alone as dusk sets in. Devastated, Shiki tries to rationalize his sorrow. After all, they did meet again in the classroom as promised, and she said she was going to be happy even when alone from now on. Of course, that wasn't at all what he truly wanted. He wants to be near her, he wants to talk to her, he wants to feel her warmth, and mostly, he wants to see her smile. Yet, she tells him to live happily without these things. How is that even possible? Even so, he decides to do it, even if it means lying to himself, so that she can dream without worrying about him. For his own resolve, he thanks her for the beautiful memories, and musters all the courage he can to move on. After the credits roll, CL-sensei congratulates us on clearing the route, and encourages us to try out the other content still left in the game. Certainly, we'll do just that in another video, but for now, let's reflect on the current ending. What we just saw is consistent with Arcueid's true ending in the original story. It's depressing as all hell, which is why many fans were happy the original had an alternative ending, where Arcueid was kinda just okay with her impulses. She even butted in for some of Ciel's happy moments. I really don't know why this good ending was omitted from the remake, but it comes off as rather bare bones when you know just a bit more about other Tsukihime works. For instance, the Tsukihime manga has an epilogue where Shiki stubbornly decides to seek out the Millennium Castle and be with her anyway. Who knows, maybe he becomes a dead apostle for her to feed on. Being together would take sacrifices for sure, but there's no reason they couldn't find a way, just like our boy Shiro found a way to reunite with Artoria and Avalon. As I discuss in my original Tsukihime lore, Nasu wrote side stories called Talk and Prelude, which were supposed to serve as an introduction to a potential Tsukihime too. It would have featured Shiki and Arcueid continuing their adventures together. Then there's Melty Blood and Kagetsutoya, which gave Arcueid plenty of chances to appear again without her bloodlust being too much of a problem. The idea is that her bloodlust really reaches its worst when she falls in love with Shiki, so in routes where they aren't together, it doesn't become an issue. With how gorgeous this remake is, I have to say it's a bit disappointing to see it end exactly as the original did, not so much as giving a nod to the other possibilities the Nasuverse has explored since the year 2000. That said, Arcueid's route is the most faithful adaptation from the original. A lot of the new stuff it adds winds up being superficial. There was no sufficient reason why they had to swap Nero for Vlov. Characters like Goto Saiki and Dr. Araku wind up going nowhere, and characters like Mario and Noelle don't do anything new that Ciel didn't already accomplish in the original. Thus, think of Arcueid's route as an appetizer, since Ciel's route embraces the remake's changes a lot more. I hope you're looking forward to that, but don't forget to like, comment, and share this video to help the series survive the algorithm. They aren't easy to make, but your effort really does have an impact. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!